Okay, the recording is started. So last week we left off talking about demography and then urban history. Hopefully, if you've had the chance to go to the urban history lecture and to really look at how cities have evolved, historically speaking, there's a few major points that I wish to reiterate and make again, if in case they weren't clear last time. And that is, why do cities form, right? And some of you had indicated, answers to this, and it has to do with the uh, the role of specialization, the role of economies of scale, and how cities connect to other cities when people start specializing and and making certain things, but not everything that they need, right? And so to understand this, we can kind of take a look at early human society. I was reading see if I can find this again. Actually, I'll just talk about it. It'll take too long to find it. So, as you may or may not know, human evolution, Homo sapiens, right? That's our species, genus and species, Homo sapiens. Um, we weren't the only hominids, HOMINIDS, around, right? And so if you're taking like a basic bio, anthropology, paleontology class or something similar, you've probably heard of Neanderthals, right? Some of you may have called your friends Neanderthals also, very negatively, I might say. That's not nice. Um, but there's a whole bunch of these different hominids, right? Here, I'll type in the words HOMI hominids. Oh, I forgot the I, NIDS, hominids. And So, what is a hominid? It's something that kind of resembles us, maybe bipedal, right? Bipedal, maybe with hands and opposable thumbs, right? I mean, if you look at every science fiction, or most science fiction series out there, even the aliens we encounter are hominids, more or less, right? I mean, they have like blue skin and scales, but like somewhere in the middle of that, all of that madness, what you recognize as a human being, and of course that's by design. It's familiar to us. It'd be very hard for human beings to emotionally attach to a creature that does not look like us at some level, right? And so science fiction creatures are exotic enough, but they're very human also. Okay, and so we have this tendency to anthropomorphize. You've probably heard this word, right? Anthropomorphize other things, meaning that we impute human characteristics to other things. Why do we do that? It's selfish. We love ourselves first, and then we love people who are like us, our family, or close to us genetically, and then others we have decided who are worthy of our love, our friends, community members, others, right, and so on. That's who we care about. If you're particularly caring and loving, you start caring about abstract things like your nation, not the people in it, but the nation, and you're willing to like give up your life for it, right? Contravene basic biological impulses. So um, we have our uh, it's sort of a bias that we have in this, right, for hominids, and so it makes sense, why this is the case. And so in our early history, we weren't the only kind that were around. There were Neanderthals, there were Denisovans, Homo erectus, Australopithecus afarensis. That's even much farther back than then. And and all of these were early hominids, right? And some of them survived, some of them didn't. But in the end, only one survived, right? There can be only one, to quote a old school movie. And that was Homo sapiens, us. And so the easy answer is that we were, or I shouldn't say easy, but the biological or natural selection answer is that we were the most suited to our environment in the earth. Okay, but what happened to Neanderthals, right? Um, Sort of our closest living hominid relatives. Why didn't they survive? Right? Any guesses? It actually is maybe the first clue into what makes humans humans, and laid the foundation for complex civilization, including urbanism, which we are students of now. What happened to Neanderthals? Some some part of Neanderthal DNA still survives in a lot of us, by the way. It's still there, right?
Talking about cavemen, Professor?
No, we don't want to use words like cavemen, but yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Victor. Yes, cavemen. Fine. Robert Perez is lost. You're honest. Owen says, "Hey guys, if you're directing comments to the class, make sure you hit everyone. Otherwise, only I see your comments." Join to bipedals, babies with two hands. Okay. So Alex, go ahead.
The Neanderthals could not organize into large groups, whereas the Homo sapiens could organize into large groups around a common idea and form armies.
Okay, if you guys didn't catch that, that's correct for the most part. Alex, where did you read that, or did you just encounter that recently, or?
I think I just
You heard it somewhere? It's a very specific piece of knowledge. So kudos to that. Elizaveta is saying they died off humans' first act of genocide. Wow. Well, we mixed with them actually. We did. Hence the Neanderthal DNA and many of
that I
us.
heard from my family.
Okay, so, but let me recount Alex's explanation. They could not organize into large groups. That's pretty much it, or they didn't. So recently there was a paper that basically analyzed Neanderthal DNA and found that it was fairly consistent with very little intermixing with other Neanderthals. That consistent meaning, like, when they analyzed the genetic makeup of this particular group of Neanderthals, they found that they probably did not mix with their neighbors who lived as little as 2 weeks walk away from them over a period of 50,000 years. This would be kind of like you and me just sort of chilling in Pomona for 50,000, you and me and our ancestors chilling for 50,000 years in just Pomona. And some of us never leaving Pomona to go to San Francisco. Because that's how long it would take if you were just chilling and walking. Like, not a fast walk, right? A slow walk is 2 miles an hour. You walk for 8 hours a day, that's 16, right? 16 to 20 miles a day. Within 15 days, you should be 300 miles or so. Okay, let's say you don't do that over 2 weeks. You do that over several generations. 50,000 years just living in one area and not going to San Francisco. No human being would do that. You know why? Because somebody along those 50,000 years would just be tired of their family and just leave. Right? We have that in us, right? And so what does that mean? To Alex's point, what this really means is that they were isolated, very isolated, in fact. And of course, the reasons for that are possibly complex. Maybe it has to do with just their ability to communicate, right? For example, there are areas of your brain, like your Broca's area in your brain and other parts of your brain that are intimately involved with things like planning for the future, language, right? All of these things allow human beings to cooperate, right? Plan and cooperate, right? One could say that our field, planning, or we have the word urban in it, but planning itself is foundational to human civilization, right? Planning is just a coordinated group activity. And this doesn't really take off until language. Another recent paper has posited that language evolved as early as 1.5 million years ago. I'm sorry, yeah, as early, because which it runs a bit counter to theory, current thinking, which says it was maybe a few 100,000 years old. All right, so language and large-scale coordination, or even small-scale coordination, is what sets our species apart, because we don't really have any physical attributes that make us even superior to our house cat. Like, I was watching my house cat. I don't know if you ever do that, right? It easily jumps 5 to 8 times its height, easily, like without even the really like out of shape house cats. They're like 3 to 5 times their height, right? They're extremely fast, right? But that's about it, you know. And human beings are not particularly fast. Uh, even Usain Bolt and that level compared to animals, sprinters, we're nowhere near. We don't have anywhere near the fast twitch fibers that they do, right? One exception is there though. Human being can outlast almost any animal. Maybe a horse and a camel are the exceptions in an endurance race. You get us, our slow twitch endurance ability is unparalleled, except maybe a couple of animals. We can just keep going as long as we have carbohydrates and water. Okay. Yeah, there you go, Jeremiah. Personal attestation to I'm not just making this up. Thank you. And so, physically we're not the most remarkable. We can grasp things, which is pretty important. Orcas are pretty intelligent. They communicate, intelligent to the point where they just torture other animals and for the fun of it. Unfortunately, that kind of perversion is a sign of intelligence, where you're just like torturing a seal to death, or just I'm going to knock over the ship because let's just see what they do. There's no particular play. Play is a characteristic of higher order thinking, right? Why? Because play indicates that you have a very vibrant imagination. You're able to conceptualize things like what if, right? We take this for granted. Other creatures probably don't do that to the same degree, even the super intelligent one. Victor, you had a question?
No, sir. I'm clapping there.
Oh, okay. You're like, hey, go humans. Okay.
No, your topic is very interesting. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. And so you have these orcas that are incredibly intelligent, except they don't have hands. So I was like, can you imagine being as intelligent as you are, but not being able to make tools or engage in tools? Like everything is like on fire in here. But that's it. Now, of course, they've grown in an environment which is an aqueous environment, and that's all they need and know, right? But for us, we kind of need our hands to fully engage our world, right? Hands and feet. I'm not saying it's not possible to do that. Certainly is. There are people who have had accidents and others who are sort of born that way who do just fine. Stephen Hawking is probably the best example. Somebody has no use of any of his faculties and was more productive than most people will ever be, just using his mind, right? Depends how you define productivity, but let's be honest. I mean, the man's contributions are seminal. And so the point being is that we have an ability to engage and manipulate our environment, plan, coordinate, and language is a very important thread in all of that. So that cooperation and coordination across space and time is what sets the framework or sets the ball rolling for complex civilization, right? Why is it important? Because it allows us to say things like this, like, hey, I'm good at, let's say, talking. You might be good at hunting. Somebody else is really good at entertaining. Somebody else is really good at something else, at making baskets, right? In early human civilization, these activities were not as specialized as we see today, right? In hunter-gatherer society, it was characterized by what is called mechanical solidarity. This is from Durkheim, who's a sociologist. Means that everybody was really good at kind of the same things, right? Like even if somebody was a better farmer than you, like you kind of knew how to farm, even if you weren't a really good farmer. You just had to know these things, because getting food, water, and building shelter right? And keeping the the tribe safe. Were kind of really important. I, Everybody kind of did that. Now, so there was some level of specialization, but really you don't see this until you have the advent of city states and agriculture, right? And now the latest thinking in agriculture. Normally, when I present this topic, I present this as a linear evolution. Like we had Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and Neanderthals were all in one area. They died off. We interbred with them, killed some of them off. Anyway, in the end, there was only one man, humans, Homo sapiens. And then for thousands of years, we wandered around, right? We made our way out of Africa in different waves. The current thinking is that there was not one wave of migration out of Africa, but many waves of migration out of Africa. We made our way to Europe and to Asia, and then across the Bering Strait, eventually into North America. Okay, far-flung places like that. And in this migration, we developed distinct phenotypes. Phenotypes is outward characteristics, skin color, eye shape, right? All those things. Human beings are like 99.99% similar. The very genetic variation between human beings is very small. But when you look at the phenotypes, we tend to think, oh, we're very different from each other, right? But we're not. Genetically, we're very similar to each other. In fact, at the biological level, there's no basis for race. I want you to appreciate that. Except race is a social construct based on phenotypes. So is it important? You bet it's important, because there's a thing called racism. It exists. On the other hand, if you just look at it genetically, it doesn't make sense to speak of different races within the human, within Homo sapiens. Weird, right? A creature that has created an entire new way of classifying things based on a thing that matters very little from a biological standpoint. Yay, humans! Pat on the back. Or not yay. However you want to look at that. So there's successive waves out of Africa, and somewhere along the way, we realized that we don't always have to forage. We don't always have to hunt and gather. That we can do this thing called agriculture, right? Not agriculture, agriculture. And current thinking on this is that actually some groups knew how to do agriculture. They just decided that it was not worth it. It was too difficult. So they like experimented for a while. They stayed in one place, and then they abandoned it, went back to foraging and hunting and gathering. So like the way we teach it is like once humans discovered agriculture across the planet, they formed cities. That's not true. But for our purposes, we're gonna keep to that idea a little bit. Inefficiency, right? Exactly, Jeremiah. And for some groups, depending on where they were, it was more efficient to actually keep hunting and gathering than agriculture, right? There are examples of this, like our first city states. And if you go through the urban history lecture, I said we're Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Indus Valley. But even before that, in the Anatolia region, which is Turkey, you have these proto city states like Çatalhöyük. You can look this up. There's a huge dig there if you're interested. This is like an early city that's something like 9,000 years old, way before Sumerians, much before, right? But this civilization is not as continuous. Like you had the Sumerians, and then you had the Hittites, Kassite, Babylonians, New Babylonians, and you can start like really seeing the development of city-states throughout the Middle East, Northwest India, China, Egypt, all of these places, and then eventually the Greeks, right? And Europe. So there's, once city-states started, the Fertile Crescent in the modern day Iraq and Mesopotamia, they really seem to have taken off throughout the world. But even before that, we were experimenting with like city life a little bit, urban life. Çatalhöyük is one of them. It seems to have been abandoned. We're not sure why. Some think because they just ran out of food. Others think diseases. Others say that it's a combination of that, but also they really did not have the social structure for hierarchy, right? I mean, I want you to appreciate this. You know, we have a presidential election underway right now where we have two people who are vying to lead the nation, quote unquote, whatever that means, right? In the census, we have things like head of household. It's a category, right? Human beings have a module in the brain, for lack of a better word, a module, an area of the brain, which basically says, where do you stand next to the other person in a hierarchy? It could be like how fast you are, how smart you are, how emotionally intelligent you are, how good looking you are, how well you can, you know, thread a needle, how well you can draw water. For every activity, we have little hierarchies in our brain. Some are better, some are, but we're always putting ourselves in this rank. It's called rank ordering. Rank ordering. I'm here, they're here, here. And you know, the reasons for this are probably have to do with who deserves what, right? And also like at some level you got to like yourself versus others, otherwise you stop fighting for yourself. Maybe there's other deeper reasons for this also, but we do it. Okay, we have hierarchy, and so we take this hierarchy that we have a natural predisposition for, and as you have complex civilizations, you start developing hierarchies that lead us to like what we have today, the modern nation state, where we have a precedent of the United States that is basically top dog over 340 million people. Think about that, right? At some level, that should sound absurd to you because a precedent will never encounter the vast majority of those 340 million people. The precedent, up to now, it's a he, this time it might be a she, has in the United States at least only dealt with people as abstract entities, groups of people. They read policy papers, they make decisions, they set forth policy and rules that impact all of us, but only in the abstract. What do I mean by that? They don't know us. This is very different than the village leader 9,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, who pretty much knew everybody in the village intimately, one-on-one, right? Because the village was 10, 20, 30 people big. That's the mechanical solidarity piece of it. So agriculture comes into play. What does agriculture do? When you have enough agriculture, you have an economy of scale of agriculture. What does it mean? It means that you have developed the technology to do agriculture in such a way where you don't need all hands on deck, but a few hands on deck. And those few hands on deck are specialists in growing food. They're really good at it. And they're good at it to the point where they create a surplus. So they produce enough food for themselves and a lot of other people. What this allows is the rise of specialists. Right? Think about it. Even if you were like really good at singing back in the day and you lived in a village of 20, 30 people, at some point you would need to get food and shelter, wouldn't you? Right. So you probably had to grow it yourself, or you had some elementary form of barter where you would perform singing things or plays or whatever you want to call them once in a while, and people just give you food, handouts, like you exchange, barter, right? But eventually, you had the rise of temple cities in Mesopotamia, where you had specialists like priest kings, right? Priests, kings, sometimes priest kings, and one of the most important innovations, scribe. Somebody who specialized in writing. Not everybody could read and write. Right? Specialized in writing. Think about priests mediate the relationship between individuals, areas, and God or the supernatural, whatever, right? The belief system was. This is profound, right? Because as far as we know, there's no real evidence for this except like Rainfall happens intermittently. Thunder kills people randomly. Some people get hurt, others don't get hurt by an animal. So people had to make sense of all of this, right? Somebody should have control over the world that they didn't understand. And so that somebody was a supernatural force in the beginning, like rain, thunder, sun. These are the earliest versions of God. And then later, God became like a person or an abstract thing that you could have a relationship with. This is the monotheism, right? Mono meaning one God, innovation. Okay. So who helps you deal with this? The priests. Why did we rely on them? Because once in a while they were right, even though they were often wrong. They did some complex ritual and it didn't do anything. But once in a while the rains came, just statistically speaking, it does happen. And you're like, there's no way to disprove they didn't cause it. There's no way to prove they caused it. So what do human beings do? We hedge our bets, right? Maybe this priest is onto something. Okay. Then we had kings. Why would we have kings? Because we believe in hierarchy. We need somebody to run this whole thing. In the end, we need somebody to say, you're right, you're wrong. Right? So you have Tales of Solomon and his wisdom, right? You guys have all seen Lord of the Rings? Right? The last one is Return of the King. J.R. Tolkien, you can enjoy it at any level you want, but if you want to enjoy that at a deeper level, basically his argument is this: there is good and evil, and that enlightened individuals are important to fighting evil. And the enlightened individuals are like Aragon, the king. Right? In his worldview, J.R. Tolkien's worldview, a benevolent king, an enlightened king, is the only sane way to construct society. Because democracy does not work. And there's a great deal of mathematical proof for this, actually. Except you might say, well, it worked pretty well enough in the last so many 100 years or so, since most of the world has become democratic, right? Yeah, the rings of power, right? And so the whole idea of a king was one who dispensed justice, right? And so you had the Code of Hammurabi. I used to go over this in detail. And the Code of Hammurabi was the first sort of codified set of rules used to organize society. The first set of rules to organize society. And he had exciting rules like if a son hits his dad, the dad can cut off his son's hands. Exciting rules like that. Right? If your wife cheats on you and she jumps into a river and she doesn't drown, she didn't cheat on you. Exciting rules like that. Code of Hammurabi. If you buy something from somebody and they cheat you, too bad. You were suckered. Buyer beware. Code of Hammurabi. It's all in there. Right? But it was like, I don't know, 200 or 300. I can't remember how many there are. Kyle says, sounds like witch trials. But it helped organize society. A lot of them were around trade, actually, and ownership. Earliest form of writing that the scribes did were not about religion. You know what they were about? They were business contracts. Why were they business contracts? Because we are a world full of specialists now. Somebody makes this, somebody makes a trinket. You want to be able to exchange things for things you want, right? What do specialists allow? They allow people to do things better. They allow for the development of technology. They allow things to be done better than they have ever been done before, furthering the economy of scale, meaning that one person or a group of people cannot build a Boeing 747, but you get enough people doing and assembly lines and throw in computers, you can build them fairly quickly. Actually, right? This giant, heavy, thing that weighs hundreds of thousands of tons that takes off into the air. At the peak of the war effort in World War II, the U.S. was producing a transport plane every 63 minutes. That's the beauty of the assembly line. And this assembly line was like several miles long. That's how long the factories were. But we had it down. This group of people makes this group of people makes this group of people make this. As it made its way from one end to the other, you had pretty much almost a finished plane, right? I'm exaggerating a little bit. It wasn't quite that simple, but it's nice to see what an assembly line can create in terms of an economy of scale. Scale is the word. Economy is the other word, right? When you can produce things at scale, it means that you have a bunch of specialists making little parts in different areas, this is called supply chain, they come together to create a finished product that can be made faster and of higher quality than if only a small group of people was making them. What allows this? It goes back to the story of the Neanderthals. Communication, cooperation. It's fundamental to this, right? Technology, cooperation are intimately linked. Technology, economies of scale are intimately linked. So this gives rise to complex human civilizations, specialization, and the economies of scale. It allows civilization to thrive, right? To the point where we have 8 billion people living on the planet, far, far above what would occur if we were still in the hunter-gatherer sort of mode, right? Some might say we're too successful. We have gone from creating technology that's really cool and allows our species to survive to becoming basically parasitic, right? Because if you look at a human being, what is a basic need? A need is just food, shelter, and water. That's it. Anything beyond that is a want. Right? Jeremiah says we're greedy. That's the want. Want equals greed, right? So if you have a solid diet of 2,000 calories, it's fairly balanced, macros and micros, and you got a basic home, right, that prevents you from getting wet mostly, even if it has a few leaks, it's okay. It's how our ancestors lived. And you have a steady supply of water from somewhere. Beyond that, you don't need anything to exist, right? Except as planners, how do we conceptualize people's quality of life? Look at our general plan. It covers a lot of things. Well, housing should be affordable. Healthcare access should be affordable. People should have the right to participate in their democracy. Wow, what is that? That's like a crazy thing. If you were to describe that to our ancestors, they're like, what's a democracy? What is participation? And why is that an important need? Right, coffee, right, exactly. We need coffee. Coffee. Not only do we need coffee, but we need it pressed at a certain pressure, right? For which we have to buy complicated machines. Okay, and so wants become needs, and the system that's really good at converting wants into needs is the global capitalist system, because it is able to organize production and capital at various parts of the planet. It no longer has to be in one place. The coffee growers can be located in Kenya, the packaging can be done somewhere else, and the end buyer is somewhere else. And the middleman is probably Starbucks, more often than not. It's true. It's absolutely true. And then you have Starbucks, incredible economy of Starbucks grows. And then your people are like, oh, their coffee is over roasted, it's burnt. I'm going to go to like Pete's Coffee. And then you're like, well, you're still a chain, man. I grow my own beans or something crazy like that. Or sorry, I procure my own beans. Grow your own beans would be crazy, but I get them from this specialty person who only exports to and they pay prevailing wage where they buy them. And then I roast them at home. And I was like, how much time are you spending doing this? Right? It's really into coffee. You're really into microbrewing. You're really into whatever, right? People are into a lot of things on the side. Yeah, never be cooler than a hipster. That's true. See, he grows his own beans. Aryan, thank you. See, I can literally say random things, and one of you would have an example of somebody who does that. That's the beauty of our complex civilization here. But he is in crippling debt, exactly. And so we have a highly specialized economy where most of you are going to go out and do a job that actually is not related directly to growing food, but I would say it enables it, right? Because some of you care about food deserts, like right? So at least as planners, we do things that are somewhat related to needs at a more fundamental level. But many people will do things that have nothing to do with ensuring the actual survival of the species. Except sometimes they'll be highly paid for it. Like, they'll put a ball through a net. They'll put a ball over a net. They'll put a puck into a net. They'll hit a ball using a bat. They'll hit a ball using their foot. right? Sports, right? Serves no practical purpose except to entertain and inspire. Except I would say perhaps when all the needs are met, there's no other more greater need than things that serve that artistic. Sports at its peak is an art, right? It's an art gives meaning to life, right? And so human beings, once they this is if you look through the lecture notes, you'll come across Maslow's pyramid of needs. The bottom part of the needs are food, shelter, water, sleep. Then you get into safety. Okay, then you get into love, right? So once we're fed, we're like, I want to be safe. I need a slightly better house. Doesn't leak all the time. Right? I need a house where I can shoot somebody when they come over to my front yard. Oh, I'll pass the Second Amendment. Complex things. And then we need love. Well, I'm safe now, but I got no one to share this with. So that love somewhere in there, right? And you go through that whole hierarchy. You can organize it in a few different ways. Bottom is always food, shelter, water. You get to the top, it's meaning of life, self-actualization. And that has no answer. It could be anything, right? But it's kind of like you have everything else taken care of. How do you find meaning? And so I would say art and sports are certainly a big part of that. And so our society, we just had the Olympics, right? And there lots of like stuff is said about the Olympics, brings the world together. We made fun of France, and then we liked it. We felt really inspired by some people, didn't feel inspired by others, and so on. But in the end, the Olympics is just a bunch of games. Or is it? Or is it a testament to how successful we are as a species that we can host this thing called the Olympics, where the finest specimens of the human race, and I don't say this in a sarcastic way, I absolutely 100% mean it, the finest specimens of human beings, some of the finest specimens, meaning like they are elite and exemplary, compete against each other to inspire the rest of us about what our possibilities are, right, as a species. Okay, and so it's pretty amazing. I mean, that as a species, we were able to accomplish all this in the last 5,000 years. And we're so dang good at it and so parasitic that we might kill ourselves along the way. That's the flip side of it. Okay? Yeah, exactly. All right. So keep this in mind. We create cities, or cities emerge to enable specialization and economies of scale, which in the long run allow us to do whatever the heck we want to. Frees up our mind because we're not always thinking about water and waste and electricity and energy and food, to do whatever the heck we want, to dream, right? It's an amazing thing. But if we didn't solve that, most people don't think where the water comes from in the United States, where the electricity comes from, where the internet comes from, right? We don't think about the technical nuances of it because we don't need to. Why would we? Why would I devote brain power to that? Somebody else is taking care of it. Right? And before you're like, we're so stupid, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. Because if you thought about that, you would not do the things that are interesting to you. Your job is to do the things that are interesting to you and do them really well, and do them so well enough that maybe others can benefit from it and make you a little bit of money along the way. That's our system. Right? That's your job in our system. And hopefully you don't screw anybody over too badly, or the environment, which you probably will. That's also our system. Right? Make no mistake about it. The cost is always somebody else and the environment somewhere along the way. Because going back to my earlier premise, our needs are small. Everything else is a want. Everything else that you have in your life, from your 5 laptops, 2, and 3 different smartphones, and 2 which are sitting in your thing still, not used anymore, right? To the 50 pairs of shoes, for those of you like shoes, to the really complex organizational scheme you have going in your closet, to the 50 different cuisines you sample in any given month. None of that is needed. It's the want, but it makes money for somebody along the way, right? It does. Okay. So cities are the best equipped to deal with specialization, economies of scale, right? That's our take-home story. And so we got to manage these cities somehow. As planners, we have to allow people to thrive. How do we allow people to thrive? Make sure the water is on and the electricity is humming along and the roads work, infrastructure works. The needs are met. And also, if you care about urban design, we have open spaces so people can come and argue with each other, meet each other, develop social capital, and be healthy so they can walk and bike without getting hit by a car that's self-driving, right? Or not self-driving. So we can ensure that people have affordable housing so they have some resources left over to do other things that allow them to live their best lives and thrive. Right? That's the role of a planner. Okay, stop there for a second. Any other questions? Hopefully, if you're like, what the heck am I doing in this field, at least for the time being, you feel good about it a little bit. I hope. I do. The older I get, the more, the better you get at rewriting your story, so everything makes sense. Haha, no. The older I get, I'm very happy to be in this field. More happy now than I was before, right? Or it could be, as I said, I don't want to look at the other side because then I'll be really sad. Like, oh, I could have done that. Who knows? I would say this though, if you guys maybe take this with a grain of salt, or think deeply, but don't think too deeply. Know when not to think deeply and know when to think deeply. Because sometimes if all you do is think deeply, you don't act. You don't have an answer to things. Sometimes you need an answer to things. You need a direction. But at the same time, there are times you should think deeply about why you're doing the things, what it all means. The balance. All right, let's look at. No questions on that. I want to switch gears and look at. So I've sort of laid the foundation for cities, but now when you have cities, you have these complex things called rules and regulations and laws, right? Which at the end they're made up. Every law is made up. There's nothing real about it. It's just an abstract thing or statement that says, do this, don't do that. If you do this, this is the punishment. If you do this, this is the incentive. Right? That's rules and regulations. Okay, so let's look at the foundations of planning, the legal foundations of planning. I'm going to share my screen with you, so give me a second here. You guys see this? Legal foundations of planning? Alex, do you see that on your screen? Yes? Cool, thank you. All right. Thank you, Victor. All right, so when we talk about our legal foundations, what we are really talking about is the U.S. Constitution, fundamentally. That is the law of the land. It's the law that every other law must test itself against, right? And so the U.S. Constitution is the litmus test for all other rules. That's why sometimes we say, is zoning constitutional? That's another way of basically saying is that zoning is done at the city level, but what would the Constitution say about it? And is it okay according to the U.S. Constitution? So, 100 or so years ago, there was a case, and if you have taken planning history, you know about this case. It's called Euclid versus Ambler Realty. I think there's a slide on this later, where the Supreme Court of the United States, which interprets the Constitution, said zoning is a legitimate use of the police power of the state. Legitimate use of the police power of the state. Okay, so what is this police power? Police power, it describes the basic rights of governments to make laws and regulations for the benefits of their communities. Under the system of government in the U.S., only states have the right to make laws based on their police power, not cities, states. The lawmaking power of the federal government is limited to the specific grants of power found in the Constitution. So the U.S. Constitution recognizes only federal and state governments. And whatever rules it does not specifically give to the federal government are the powers of the state. So this was the whole Roe versus Wade thing, right? Where Roe versus Wade was nullified by the U.S. Supreme Court recently. And they basically led abortion up to the states. They said this is not a federal thing, this is a state thing. They shifted the focus back to the states. Sub-state units, cities, get their power, police power, from the state through enabling legislation. Okay. So, however, cities need police power of the state to regulate land use or do zoning. So this is given to the cities by the states through enabling legislation. Mechanism by which a state delegates its inherent police power, including the power to plan and zone, to local government. How do we know state has inherent police power? Because the Constitution says so. What is the police power? Is the power to make rules and regulations for the benefit of communities. Oh, what areas does it cover? Laws governing safety, health, welfare, and morals. This is derived from the 10th Amendment, which states that powers not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution nor prohibited by the states are reserved to the states, respectively, and to the people. Right? So I want you to appreciate the logic here. The Constitution of the United States, right, which is the main, it's the founding document, if you will. It's the thing which tells us what we can and can't do. Recognizes two branches of government, federal and state. And then there's a thing called police power, which allows government, mostly state government, to make rules governing health, safety, welfare, and morals. However, the state says, hey, cities, you are also a type of government. We're going to give you some of this police power through enabling legislation. Of course, we also have counties, right? Counties also make rules. Okay. So state legislatures exercise their police power by enacting statutes, not statutes or rules, that they delegate much of their police power to counties, cities, towns, villages, and large boroughs. So there's different, right? Like we have counties and cities, but like you go to New York, they have boroughs. You have towns also, villages in some other areas, and so on. So police power is the basis for enacting substantive laws in areas such as zoning, land use, fire, and building codes, gambling, discrimination, yada, 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 right? But zoning is our main thing. So if a law is enacted pursuant to the police power and it does not promote health, welfare, safety, or morals, you can sue the city or the state, and eventually it may make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they will rule the law constitutional or unconstitutional. So this is what happened with zoning. There were some examples of early zoning. Zoning is just land use regulation. And eventually there was a lawsuit. It was called the Ambler Realty. They wanted to do some development in the village of Euclid. And Euclid tried to impose certain rules on this development. And Ambler Realty said, you don't have the right. Euclid, you don't have the right to tell us how to build. And Euclid said, yes, we do. This case made its way eventually to the Supreme Court, which said, you know what? The ability to create something called zoning, which is land use designations that separate land use and stipulate things like what you can do in those land uses and what you can't do. So like in an R1 zone, which is where you have mostly single family homes, you can have single family homes, meaning homes that are detached from each other. And in the beginning, the rule said that you can have people who are related by blood or adoption living in these homes. Unrelated people can't live in these homes. Some of these rules are still on the code today, right? So like, why is this an issue? Because if you buy a single family home and you rent it out to, let's say, a fraternity near a college, it's a house, and the fraternity has 5 different people who are not related, the city could theoretically use the code to force you to shut down your rental business to the fraternity because the people living in there are unrelated, right? It can be used. Cities don't do this anymore, but some cities still have this on the books. So if you're in a commercial zone, then you can build things that are commercial in nature or for business, right? If you are in a specific plan for a for a large theme park in Anaheim, then you can build Disneyland. Otherwise, you can't. Right? So that's what zoning allows you to do. And it was a Supreme Court case in the 1920s, that Euclid versus Ambler Realty, that validated, that made zoning legal. Police power, however, does not allow private property. We are a private property-based society. Not just your house, but also like if you create something and you patent it, it's yours. You can make money off it. You can trademark it. It can even be a saying, and you trademark it. If somebody uses that, you can sue them because that is your property. So private property is not just physical property; it's also intellectual property, right? The right to own things that you created, that you have bought from others. What does it mean to buy from others? For example, the Beatles wrote their music, right? Actually, forget the Beatles. Taylor Swift, right? One of her first court cases was against, I forget what her name of her label was, but basically, like, they owned the rights to some of her first recordings. She sued and bought them out. I forget, it was some combination of lawsuits or buying them out. Basically, she got the rights to her own music. Now, you might be thinking, well, she created it. Is that her right? No. If a company gave you an advance to create your song, and you created a song for their record on their record label, and you sold it under the record label, and you signed a contract saying this song belongs to the company, even though you created it, the ownership of the song is not you, or you're not the owner, it's the company. So ownership is a specific bundle of rights that are described maybe in a contract, or maybe they're described in a deed, right? If it's a piece of land, so it just depends. But we are, take home point, we are a property ownership society, and property is not just physical property; it's also intellectual property. Police power does not allow for the taking or divestiture of private property, including a de facto taking. In other words, a taking that is not explicitly a taking, but results in a taking. What does this mean? It's kind of like this. You're a parent, and you tell your kid, I'm not punishing you, but you can't leave the house. Right? The kid is like, well, I want to go see my friends. You're like, yeah, you can't do that. You can't leave the house. And then the kid goes, but dad, mom, you're punishing me. And you're like, no, I'm not punishing you. I'm just saying you can't leave the house. Is that a punishment or not? So the kid could argue, mom and dad, even though you're not calling it a punishment, it's a de facto punishment. De facto punishment. So even if something is not a taking, it can be a de facto taking. What does this mean? It means, what is a taking? It's when a city or unit of government takes private property for a public use without compensating the owner. Right? So the state is like, we're going to build a freeway. We need all these houses vacated where the freeway is going to be built. So you have to use eminent domain. There is a power that is vested in government, which allows government to take private property as long as it provides the owners with just compensation. So if somebody takes your house to build a freeway, they have to pay you market value for that house. Right? And if they don't, but they have to demonstrate that it's for public good. Victor, you have a question? Go ahead.
Little babies, are they considered our private property, even though they're human?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Alex?
With eminent domain, is there a way to, so one problem I see with eminent domain is that they're taking it at the time that they choose to and compensating you based on if you sold it at that time.
Correct.
Is there a way to try and claim that you should get the amount of money that it would take if you were selling the house at a time of your choosing, not at a time of their choosing?
It's all in the here and now, because you can make all kinds of claims. That what you can do, Alex, is to make the claim that I have a. You bring up an interesting point. What, for the rest of you, what Alex is asking is this, basically. You have a house that's on a 12,000 square foot lot. and the house is only 900 square feet. And the city comes in and says, hey, we need to build something here. The value of your 900 square feet house right now is 500,000. But you're like, hey, I was just about to destroy my 900 square feet house and put a 4,000 square foot house because my lot is actually zoned for that. And the value of that 4,000 square foot house is 1.5 million. What Alex is asking is, does the city have to pay you 500,000 or 1.5 million? The simple answer is they have to pay you 500,000. The complex answer is if you have a good enough lawyer, you could probably get $1 million or more. Victor.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Got a question?
No, sir, I haven't lowered my hand, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. All right, so eminent domain can be used for public goods, and these are some of the public goods. So to your point, Alex, if you have a good enough lawyer, as I said, right, if the price is not agreed upon, it can go to court. Payment is required by the Fifth Amendment. 14th Amendment gives you due process in court. These are the limits to police powers. Fifth Amendment prohibits the takings of private property without just compensation. We just talked about that. 14th Amendment prohibits states from depriving a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. But doesn't all property regulation result in privations? Privations is another fancy way of saying deprivations. Any regulation on my house is a deprivation. Why? Because if there is, it's like this, like if I can build a multi-story building in my single family residential neighborhood, why shouldn't I be allowed to do that? But then I can rent it out to like 50 people and make a lot of money, right? The government's like, no, you're not zoned for that. It's only R1. You can only go 2 or 3 stories high, or 35 feet high, which is most R1 regulations. And so you fight long and hard against this, but it runs into all those cases which basically say zoning is okay, R1 is okay, and you will lose. Okay. Just compensation, due process, and we're talking about zoning. Zoning is the trade-off between property ownership and doing whatever the heck you want and creating a urban landscape that works for everybody. Maximizes safety, lessens congestions, adequate, and all of these things that you see, allows infrastructure. It's a trade-off, right? As you can see, our system, even though it's property ownership, has these fuses built in for excessive property ownership that results in harms to others and the environment. It's a trade-off between what you want to do because, hey, I'm a free autonomous citizen, and the rights of others. I want you to see that, right? Civilization is a trade-off between individual rights and communal rights. Rights is not the right word, but impacts on the community and environment. Okay, and so land use conflicts, sometimes in our way of doing things, will often have more than one correct solution, right? But this is nonetheless the system that we use. Here's some examples of different takings cases. These are also covered in your readings, by the way. So go through them, right? Like here, Nolan versus California Coastal Commission, the essential nexus or between what the eminent domain is being used for and the actual act of eminent domains. So in other words, best way to describe this, you can't, the city or regulatory authority can't require the property owner to do something just because they're building, right? They can't use their power to do planning and building and safety checks as a way of getting the property owner to do something that is desirable, but not necessary. right? And so this can be a bit tricky because you have an older property, you go in, like right now we're trying to do ADUs, and you go in to build an ADU, and the city is like, well, your setbacks are old. They get you to basically upgrade your sewer system and do a whole bunch of other things that don't are not needed to be done, but will nonetheless improve your house and also improve the state of infrastructure in the community. Right, so there's a trade-off between that, and sometimes the cities will ask you to do things, and if you push back, it really it depends on your ability to push back legally. They'll back off. Most people won't back off. They'll just have to weigh whether I want to do the development based on the requirements, or maybe I'll just pay for the things they're asking for so they get off my back. Okay. You have these takings cases. All right. And then if you scroll down, again, I'm not going to go into this. I just want you to read the history of certain important planning milestones. So I talked about 1920s Euclid versus Ambler Realty. This is the case that validated zoning. Right. But what I want you to, as you go through this, is see that we have a long history of what's called incremental planning. Incremental planning. In other words, it's not like one day the country woke up and it had zoning. It happened over a period of years. There are a lot of court cases that went into it. And there are cases that also define the limits of planning. So like the other one was Kilo versus New London. And this is where one city tried to take a mom and pop store and give it to a larger like pharmaceutical company. I think it was Roche, or I can't remember exactly who it was. But anyway, Supreme Court said that economic development comes under health, welfare, safety, and morals. Think about that. It's kind of like the city taking your mom and pop store and selling it to a Home Depot and saying this is eminent domain, okay. Right? That's not okay. Right? For most of us, that's like, no, you're just reselling, you're making way for a bigger store that results in more taxes for the city, but it's not okay. Like my store is profitable, it's running, it may not be a Home Depot, but it's, I've been doing business for a while. Supreme Court sided with the ability of the cities to do that, to take private property and transfer it to another for economic development. This was remarkable. After the Supreme Court sided with eminent domain power of cities and interpreted broadly to include eminent domain economic development, many cities, including the Bush administration at that time, came out strongly against the Supreme Court. They said the Supreme Court said it was okay. We don't think it's okay. Many cities went on record. They passed rules saying that we would never do that. The only time we'd use eminent domain is for a legitimate health, welfare, safety, or morals. Not economic development is not health, welfare, safety, or morals. Commit those 4 words to memory: health, welfare, safety, morals. These are the 4 reasons a city can take your stuff for public use. The morals part, I find very ambiguous, more than the other. Right? Because what's morality? It's even more ambiguous than welfare. Health is a little bit more clear, right? Safety is a little bit more clear, but welfare and morals, a little bit more ambiguous. Okay, so more cases, enabling legislation. Okay, so I read about these. But anyway, so you fast forward, and what you have eventually is the creation of the Standard Zoning Enabling Acts, the Standard City Planning Enabling Acts. And this is what this whole history in the last 100 years and the cases that have followed have allowed cities to basically zone, use eminent domain, and the limits on zoning eminent domain. But it is a real power. Now, it's considered a real power. What I mean by real power, just because cities don't exist in the Constitution doesn't mean they can't regulate your land use. Okay, stop there. Any questions? Yeah. Dodger Stadium, yep. Okay. Right. What am I hoping that what is the spirit of this lecture? I want you to recognize the spirit of this lecture. The spirit of this lecture is such that human beings come up with stories that define their lives and the lives of their communities. We call some of these stories policies, rules, regulations. There's nothing natural about anything, any of this. There's nothing natural about property ownership, except it's a thing that we believe in, and we have a whole system of rules and regulations that are backed by actual police to enforce it. It could change. And we saw this. Roe versus Wade was law of the land for a while, and now it's not. Supreme Court at one point said there are racial differences among people which make one group superior to another. We don't believe that anymore, right? Right of marriage. What is considered a drug? Who owns your music if you sign away your rights on Apple Music? All of these things are defined by stories, called rules and regulations, which are constantly evolving. Constantly evolving. And it's about to get even more complicated as people make things that are not theirs using artificial intelligence. Think about that. Like, who owns what? When a song is 10% your inspiration, 90% AI that is pulled from every other source throughout the planet anyway. Right? Who owns that? Okay. Yeah, all the music sampling, right? Yeah. Makes for some really interesting concerts, for sure. That's why, and this is going to sound strange to you guys. That's why, and I want you to maybe think about what I'm saying here. Marx's ideas aren't dead by any stretch of the imagination. Right? The way to, I'm not advocating for this, but the way to sort of progress, we use the word commie in our country, right? But the way to things that are more communal in nature, I'll leave it at that because I don't want to get accused of being commie, are sometimes through free market capitalism. This is exactly the same thing that was argued by Mr. Marx. I'm not advocating that point of view because the history of communism is, and we're seeing it right now with Mr. Putin, is ugly and it's mostly dictatorial. It's horrible. Practices have not worked. It's a failure. But that's the uninteresting part of it. What I'm trying to say is that when you have a society when machines make everything and housing and food is cheap, what does it mean to own things at that point?
Monetary.
Yeah. If something else can make it really cheaply and you can get it instantly, I mean, what's the point of you owning it anyway? Nicki Minaj is not music, but yeah. Before the Swifties attack me, I'll reserve my opinion on Taylor Swift. Okay.